Hey y'all, I'm your host, Courtney Cecil. Welcome to the Life Management System, the show built for working moms who are doing all the things but still feel behind. Here we trade burnout for boundaries and survival mode for something that actually feels like a life. So before we get into today's conversation, I want to give you a little context. A while back, I sat down with Nicole Whitaker. Nicole is the host of Burn Beautiful podcast and Summit to talk about boundaries. And I don't mean like the polished Instagram quote version of boundaries, like, yeah, that stuff's great, fine, whatever, the real version. Why they keep failing, why it's usually not the other person's fault when they get cross, and what actually protects them once you start relying on willpower alone. So, Nicole and I got into it. It was generally one of my favorite conversations on the topic, and I wanted to bring it home for you here too. So, if you've ever felt like you set a boundary and it just, like, I don't know, didn't hold, this one's for you. Enjoy my conversation with Nicole.
Hey everyone, this is Nicole, your host for Burn Beautiful. And if you have been feeling stretched thin lately, or like you cross one thing off your to-do list and then 10 more seem to reappear, this conversation is for you because we have a very special guest here today, Courtney Cecil, and we are going to be talking about a hot topic, boundaries. So I'm really excited that you're here for this ever so important conversation. Courtney Cecil is the founder of the Working Moms Movement. She helps working moms go from stretched thin and stuck in their to-do list to in control and fully present for what matters in their career, their family, and well-being. Through her proven method, the life management system, she guides you from constantly juggling your to-do list and mental load to confidently owning your time and showing up for what matters most. She is also a speaker, published author, podcast host of the Life Management System for Working Moms, and previously served as head of culture at a Fortune 50. She studied industrial and systems engineering at Virginia Tech, is a proud wife and mom, and is based in Charlotte, North Carolina. Hi, Courtney. Welcome to Burn
Hello,
Beautiful.
Nicole. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'm so thrilled that you're here with us today. I'm so excited to talk boundaries with you. But first, I'd love for you to share just a little bit about yourself and what brought you to this work. Why is this work important to you?
Well, thank you for asking the question. I think that from a background perspective, the industrial and systems engineering piece is very paramount to my story. So, IE, for anybody who doesn't know, is all about how do you make things more efficient and more effective? How do you essentially optimize the entirety of a system so all the parts and pieces work together to be more successful and be able to get better results? And then culture transformation is really about behavior change at a very core level. It's like macro level behavior change, but it all happens when you inspire intrinsic motivation
Mhm.
within an individual. So it is that skill set and just kind of the marriage of them that has, I think, organically over time led people to come to me to say, "Hey, how do you do this?" So I think that while I have naturally magnetized high achieving women that are raising their hands and self-selecting to me and saying, "Help me figure out how you do all the things," I think that my story around why I do it and why I connect with my audience and my clients so successfully is because I've really walked in the shoes of total burnout. So, for perspective, before I went to lead culture at that Fortune 50, I spent 16 years inside corporate at a consulting firm where I worked for four different CEOs, but I also was a frontline consultant for many years. And my last year in consulting, I was in an incredibly toxic workplace. I was working 80-hour weeks
Oh my.
consistently for over a year. And I mean, I hit burnout. It's no surprise
Hmm.
I did, particularly when you layer in the toxic workplace.
Hmm.
But what it took me a while to realize is how much was actually in my control in that very moment to fix my conditions. So I used to blame my boss, who was responsible for the toxic workplace.
Hmm.
I used to blame how all the demands that were coming my way from my organization, but in all actuality, now I know, like the mature me knows that part of my problem is that I was a perfectionist
Hmm.
and not a healthy way. I was very addicted to Atta girls. And I had this
Hmm.
problem of giving my time away to others for free. And what I mean by that is I was giving more of myself than was being asked, more of myself than I had sponsorship for, and more of myself than I was certainly ever compensated for. So I was drowning. It was a very like invisible type of drowning that others couldn't see. They kept coming to me and be like, "Oh my gosh, girl, how do you do it all?" And guess what? I was flaming out on the back end and they didn't know that.
Hmm.
But what that signaled for me, Nicole, is that I've clearly figured out a way to do so, a way to be successful, a way to parent well and to work well and to do like I'm a prolific traveler. I have
Hmm.
very strong relationships. I am the first one that will plan the outings, go support you at your extracurriculars. Like I do all the things and they see that, but they just weren't seeing the flamed out me.
Hmm.
So now this like Courtney 2.0, the more mature version of me is able to combine the systems type thinking to where I started, which is how I was always able to do as much. But now I'm able to layer in all of that other real rooted behavior change that I brought to my day-to-day life to actually get me out of that place of burnout where I'm still able to accomplish and do as much, but in a way that's really true to me and what I value. So it is in the interest of saving others from the path that I went down and really just honoring the space that people seem to come to me organically for that has led me to start Working Moms Movement. And in particular, as a culture executive, I'm all about retaining people. That's the whole reason the job exists is to retain really good talent in organizations. But I specifically saw how many women we were losing at upper management, really, because that's
Hmm.
when a lot of women naturally leave when they have kids, but
Hmm.
a lot of 80% actually of women continue working. But it's not until their kids reach about kindergarten where they realize, holy crap, this is just really hard. It
Right.
does not get easier. And that's when they start to creep into this place of burnout because their lives are just so oversaturated because their kids are busier than they ever were and demand more of them than they ever did when they were little. But it's also where their work starts to get really extra demanding. So
Hmm.
it is also in the interest of channeling the past decade I've spent in the culture transformation space around retaining people in the workforce. It's like,
Hmm.
I don't just want to retain people, I want to be able to retain women. And we
Right.
can't retain women unless we make it sustainable for them. And part of that's systematic, like big, heavy stuff. And I'm trying to do that work with organizations and really kind of fix the root cause. But when we think about what's in our control on a day-to-day basis, those are the levers that individual moms can choose and is in the interest of helping them really build systems around what they can control that inspired me to start Working Moms Movement.
Yes, I love that. And what you were touching upon there at the end, I think is so critical. I think so many women, and myself included, when I was in burnout, it almost feels like we have to choose between staying in this environment that is, as you mentioned, is not designed. The vast majority, I was a leadership in a national nonprofit organization, and even there, I mean, it ran like corporate. It was not designed for the woman. It was definitely not designed for the woman who then had children in terms of the demand on time. And there is that structural piece that has to shift. And also, in the meantime, we are still women, and the audience listening, we can't wait for that, right? We can't wait for all of a sudden the world to change and these organizations are, you know, it restructured in a way to support moms. I think we're getting there. I think that hopefully that shift is beginning to happen in our culture, but we need that change right now. And the women listening, we don't want burnout. They don't want burnout, but they do care about having an impact and being successful at work. And yes, they are called to be incredible parents and moms to their kids, and they want that, but they don't want to have to then quit, right? They don't want it to be a trade-off. And so I love how, yes, we're talking big picture systems and structures, all about advocating for that and making that change. But then also, meanwhile, what can the women do now who are in those cultures, who are burning out? And I'd love to hear, I know that, the cost of just kind of going as it's going, as you said, like being on fire, but it looks fine, right? It's serious. And so, those women who are in the work world who are experiencing burnout, I read recently, it takes, I think, 2 to 5 years to fully recover from burnout if you get to that point. So, and this starts manifesting, as we know, in health and in mental health and physical health. And so I'd love to hear from you. I know you also work one-on-one with women. What are women struggling with the most when it comes to burnout? Like, what is this looking like in their lives? And then what work do you do with them, especially around boundaries and routines that supports them in taking kind of those first steps out of burnout?
Oh man, so this is so juicy, Nicole. Okay,
Juicy
so
stuff.
some of the stuff is a lot more talked about when you to address the question around what do they struggle with the most. We are hearing a lot more now than we ever did about mental load, invisible labor,
Yeah.
the general imbalance of domestic workload at home. Like, yes, all of that exists. Let's honor that, and then I'm going to put it aside for the second because that can be an entire episode, multiple episodes, for
Facts.
each one. One of the things that I believe most high achieving women have a hard time with, though, is that they can't turn it off. Like, we are
Mm,
chemically wired to craving the dopamine hit that happens
hmm
when we become the reliable people at work. When somebody's like, I knew I could depend on you, and we get all of those atta girls,
hmm
that becomes an addiction and it starts to create a monster inside of us that we can't turn off. And we just feel so much pressure to be the person that other people can come to, which essentially means we are in service to others. So I think that's probably the biggest root of the problem is that, yeah, some of it's that we're type A, of
hmm
course, but the other part for many of us is that we really get addicted to people recognizing our performance and people recognizing how grateful they are they can depend on us, but we never call the time out to say, but can I depend on myself? Like, can I depend on myself to protect my sleep, to protect what makes me happy, to protect my sanity? Because we naturally put ourselves last. And that's part of being a mom, right? Like, we as moms are inherently selfless. We carry a human for 9 months. We put our body through hell. We obsess over it so much because we're selfless. Like, that's just in our DNA. So we kind of do create this little bit of a monster when you marry it with the how hard it is for us to turn things off. So
hmm
the engineer in me, like engineering 101 is essentially like, I am a consummate problem solver. You cannot convince me, Nicole, that there is anything that you're experiencing in your life that cannot be fixed
Right.
because I am convinced that everything can be fixable. We just often don't think about it as being possible to fix. Like, we think about our problems at home in a very different way than we do at work. So, as an example, at work, if you're experiencing a problem, what do? We create a standard operating procedure, we implement systems, we improve our communication and feedback. Like, there's all this stuff that we are doing to problem solve and make that fixable. But at home, we do very little about that. So, when you specifically ask about boundaries and routines, just like you would at work, it's the same kind of stuff that I like to do with women at home. Some of it's that, we need to protect um things that happen at home, and sometimes
hmm
it's we need to protect what happens to them at work. But it's the same type of thinking of like, how can I problem solve the heck out of this instead of just assuming complacency instead of just assuming that it has to look like this because it often doesn't need to look like that. Like, yeah, we're in a naturally busy state of our life when you think about uh, the whole spectrum of our, growing from the ground up, from infancy to adulthood. But at the same time, it's still a marathon and it's like it has to be more sustainable. So I have slowly started building what I lovingly call a life management system. You actually alluded to this being the name of my podcast. That is, unsurprising and is by design because I'm a believer that when you build an ecosystem that works together, both your work and your home life work together, then you can build a life around what you inherently value. And because when you're clear in what you value, you're you all of a sudden are doing things that you truly prioritize. So they are there to serve you as opposed to serving other people.
Mhm.
And when you're clear in what those priorities look like, it informs with absolute clarity how you should be spending your resources. Your resources essentially are your time, your energy, and your money. So you get clear in what you value, and then that tells you what you need to prioritize. And then when you figure out what you need to prioritize, that tells you how you spend those three key resources. And that starts to eliminate all of this noise that we get consumed with in the day to day. So I talked just a bit ago about how I gave myself away for free a lot.
Mhm.
It's because I was doing things that I thought other people were asking of me, but they never were. And now, with this clarity of like, if I start with what I value first, it helps me lock in to what I can say yes and no to a lot easier. It helps me protect what I need to invest my time in or what I need to invest my energy in. And I think that clarity helps inform my boundaries. So when you're clear on what you value, you know what kind of boundaries you need to put in place because boundaries inherently exist to exclusively protect whatever it is you value. And we
Mhm.
tend to think about boundaries merely as like, I'm going to protect access to me. Like, I need to put better, so and so doesn't respect my boundaries, or I need to put better boundaries in place because my calendar is own, it's like everybody else owns my calendar. So we have a tendency of only thinking about boundaries in the context of time and access. And it is absolutely that. But it is also regarding relationships and what and who we give exposure to us or others. Or it can be physical, like touch. It can be financial. There are so many types of boundaries we can put in place, but at its core, it is all about protecting what it is that we most value.
Yes, I think that that's key. You said so much here, and I want to unpack a bit of it for our listeners because there are so many gems. And I want to get really concrete about what this looks like in practice real soon. So the first, I want to go way back to what you were saying initially about how we often get even unknowingly addicted to those dopamine hits of like the pats on the back of you're doing a great job, way to go, and so that's when one, of course, we want more of those dopamine hits. So when our boss comes to say, "Hey, can you take on this thing?" Yeah, absolutely. We can take it on. I can do this well. Or when there's someone needs, there's a social committee that people need to be a part of. Yeah, let me show that I'm a team player. I think that that can happen in practice, and then we find ourselves overextended. But I think what's key here is that I think a shift is required in order to be able to begin identifying what is valuable to you and put those boundaries in place, which is this flip from getting our dopamine hits from external sources and what others think about us and turning to our boss to see if we're doing a good job and turning to did our boss when we submitted that thing or when we made that presentation or when we spoke up at a meeting, what did people's faces look like? And kind of relying on like that hyper vigilance and awareness of how are people receiving us, which I think is a form of control. Like it's safe if we can control the way that other people view us versus flipping it inward and saying, wait a second, what matters most is do I think I did a good job? Did I like what I said? Am I? And so I want to get into these other pieces, but I'd love to hear from you just one, just your reaction to that, and two, how have you in the past supported clients in kind of flipping the script a bit so that we aren't as reliant on those external things. Because I think if we do that, then it feels way less scary to put a boundary in place where, oh my gosh, all of a sudden, what if they don't like us? Or what if they don't think that we're capable enough?
Yeah. So two things. One, a lot of my clients actually do see therapists as well. And that makes
Hmm.
sense because people who are high achieving tend to invest in themselves, and people that invest in themselves inherently continue to invest in themselves because we are always striving to be at our best. It's just part of our DNA. So some of them do see therapists, but even if they do, we do spend time talking about um, what does your history look like? Like, what was your experience with your mom, or what was your partner's experience with his or her mom? Because sometimes when you get clear on that, there's a nugget there where you're like, wow, I think I need to show up like this because it's what was modeled for me. And oftentimes that shows up less at work than it does at home because many people in our generation, Nicole, were raised with stay-at-home moms. And my mom included was Martha Stewart. Like she did all the things.
Right.
She would bring hot plates to us between our sports practices every evening. This beautiful home cooked meal, and the house always looked perfect, and the dining setting always looked perfect, and it just creates this standard for ourselves that we naturally are always, fighting to hit. And guess what? We're doing a whole lot more and have far more saturated lives than our moms did. And we show up fully for kids in ways that the past generations didn't. So part of it is that I start by trying to unpack some of the biases we might inherently be carrying with us that we didn't even realize exist.
Right.
And
And
then
one
the other
important piece I
part,
want to just
yeah,
share about that I think you're highlighting is so important is that I think that because it's what we saw, we think that that's what it means to be, for this example, a good mom. It means to do those things when in fact the research shows actually it has nothing to do with any of that, right? It has more to do with things like quality time, being a regulated, presence, et cetera. And so I think I just wanted to jump in and share that because I think what's tough is it's almost like the way that it's always been done is not necessarily the best way or what our kids need or what it means to be effective at work.
exactly. And bottom line is we're just living different realities than a
Hmm.
generation ago. So part of it is just unpacking and making a connection over some of the historical bias we take with us. But I think the single biggest freedom like lever that can be pulled for anybody is getting clear on what you value. Because often we tend to look right and left and see our neighbors or our colleagues and think that they're just doing all of these really stand-up things. And guess what? Most of the time, what we think we see is not what we see. But even if it is, like let's pretend my colleague Sarah, we're going to call her Sarah. I don't actually have a colleague Sarah, so hopefully that's safe. But I let's, my fake colleague Sarah, I look at her, I'm like, dang man, like she is a rock star. She's doing all the
Hmm.
things. I cannot keep up. Well, first of all, I don't know Sarah's circumstances. She might not have kids. She might not ever be present for her kids. She might have local help that I don't know about. She might be a trust fund baby and she has paid to for everybody else to do all the things for her. You don't really know their full story.
Hmm.
But even if you do know all of their circumstances, even if you do, it doesn't mean you value doing life the way she does. So Sarah, yeah, she might be knocking it out of the park at work, but is she knocking it out of the park at home too? I don't know.
Is
Probably
she
not.
happy? That's the other
Yeah,
thing. We
exactly.
have
Is she
no idea.
happy?
Hmm.
Yeah, is she sleeping? Is she caring for herself? So when you get clear on what you value, it inherently allows you to step into a confident place where you can make decisions on how you spend your time and your energy and your money despite what other people are doing. Because until you're clear on that, it's so much easier to look left and right and feel less than or feel like you can't keep up. But the more confident you are in your decisions, being totally aligned with what it is that you value, it makes it a lot easier to think of the rest as noise and information as opposed to something that needs to inform the way that you do your life. Because I value my health a lot. I have many clients who frankly don't really care.
Mhm.
And that is okay. They don't need to care about their health in the way that I do. They care about other things. For example, one of them, very successful, director at a Fortune 50, and she cares most about financial freedom because she grew up without that. She never lived in a home that her family owned. She never got to experience a backyard. She always, felt financial stress. And I completely empathize and appreciate why that is something she values. So because she values that, she's making very different decisions than I am, where I'm trying to always create breathing room in my mornings to make sure I get in my workout or my walks. Neither of us are doing it wrong, but it allows us to be far more confident in how we're actually spending our time and how we're making decisions regarding things like our calendar or regarding things like what we're investing in. And knowing that even though we're doing it differently, it really doesn't matter because we're making decisions that fully serve what matters most to us.
That's right. That's right. So I'd love to get a little bit even more specific. Could you walk us through an example of a value and how that might inform a boundary that we would want to create for ourselves?
Oh, yeah, it's a great question. So I value health, as I've just said. And because I value health, it is very important to me to eat healthy. And because I value eating healthy, I eat in more than I eat out. That way I can control what I eat and both the portions and the ingredients that go in it. But I also very much don't enjoy cooking. So there's a little bit of a problem, right?
Uh-oh.
So yeah, I know but what that tells me is that the what I do need, the way that I can address this is by investing somebody to actually do that cooking for me. Like that is the only option. So the boundary that I am protecting there is more my time because that is not my highest and best use. Cooking will never be my highest and best use if I'm only okay at it and it brings me literally no joy. So that is like me protecting my time. But then to flip that on the head, as an example, I have a client who one of the things that she values is her ability to go back home to she's from Romania. She wants to go back home to be able to see her family. She loves travel. She spent a lot of time on an early career days, literally traveling the world. So because she values time back home with her family, she has to be able to afford to go back home and see her family. But if she continues to let her spending kind of bleed from all sides, she's not going to have the money to go back home to see her family. So the boundaries that we were working with relative to her were very much around finances. How do we, again, boundaries help protect what it is that you value most. So if what she values is the money she needs to be able to get her back home, well, how do we protect that? How do we put guardrails in place to protect that? And I think of a boundary as a fence. Like it's not permanent. You
Mhm.
can open and close it, but you just like you would your backyard, you keep the fence closed and you choose when it gets opened and gets closed. Like you don't need the neighbor's dog walking into your backyard unless you want to invite the neighbor's dog into your backyard, right?
Mhm.
So that is exactly what we did for this client. We put very strict controls in place that allowed her to protect that boundary of her finances. So we did things like we ensured that she did not travel. Like she would go, one of her problems was that when she was on her way home from dropping off her kids at daycare, she would pass TJ Maxx, she would pass Home Goods. She passed all
Mhm.
these very tempting places that she would then stop and she'd spend money. And the next thing she knows, like she's a couple $100 later for some stuff that she really doesn't need, but was attractive in the moment. She got that dopamine hit, and it's not helping her achieve her financial goals. So we help protect the boundaries by putting controls in place there. So an example of a control there is one, she stopped traveling with her credit cards. $20 is all she needed for emergency money for that drive from her house to daycare and back. We also ensured that she always had a call after her pickup. So that way she didn't have the time to kind of joke around on her drive back. She had to get back home for that call,
Right.
her first work call of the day. Or we did things like we deactivated her Apple Pay from her phone. Like all
Hmm.
of those are controls that we put in place to protect that boundary of spend, because that boundary of spend is what enables the ultimate thing she's trying to achieve, which is how do I get home to my family for Christmas? Like
Yeah.
that's the biggest goal. So hopefully that helps you like demonstrate like how that thread can be pulled through, but also how we approach solving for this problem at home just like we would solve for the problem at work. We put controls in place, we build a system around it, and those systems are ultimately what gives us that time freedom or the pure, like full alignment with what it is that we value most in life.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I mean, one thing I want to highlight about that very last piece you said, it reminds me of Atomic Habits by James Clear, where it's about making the unwanted behavior really hard, right? So if you don't have an Apple Pay, it's hard. If you have a call that's cut, it's hard to actually do in this case, the unwanted behavior being stopping at TJ Maxx and spending money. And then you make it easier, you shrink the change or make it so much easier to do the desired behavior. And I love that because if you put those structures in place, it actually doesn't take a lot of emotional energy or self control, which I think is like, especially if we're at the end of the day, it's something that's going to get us a dopamine hit. It can be really, if we're just like, I'm just not going to do it, well, that's really hard, right? It's like putting the candy on the top shelf for the kids so they can't reach it, kind of strategy, which I think is a great one. I think what's interesting is, as you were talking, I was thinking, well, isn't that prioritization? But then as you continue to talk, I realize, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that seems more of like a boundary with self, where like I'm putting a boundary in place with myself around how I am spending, about the choices that I make, about how I am or am not going to spend my money. I think in both the examples, I'm curious if I got that right. And then I'd love to, if you're willing to go into like a juicier boundary scenario, talk about one with another individual, because I think this is where it can get really tricky, especially going back to what we were talking about beforehand, when it's like we maybe have a people pleasing tendency where we don't like it if people don't like us, or where we feel like we need to show like we've got it all together, we can handle it. And so take for example, I think a very common scenario for women is, it's the end of the day, we're wrapping up at work, and maybe 5 p.m. hits, you're trying to log off, and your boss is like, but could you do this one more thing? And say you have two values. So we're gonna make it really hard, Courtney. We're gonna see how hard we can make this. So we have multiple values, right? Because I mean, I think if we narrow it down even to like the five core values, say, so we have a value around of course, being present and physically there for our kids during this, precious time we have with them at home. And at the same time, we have a value around work. We really care about doing a good job at work because of the impact that it's going to have. We're aligned with our organization. What do we do? What does it look like in that scenario, in that very tricky scenario where it's like we feel torn between work and kids? How might we think about that? What might it look like to set a boundary around work with your boss in that scenario?
Okay, a lot to unpack here.
So
So
juicy.
I know. Okay, so let's start with the priorities. So you indicated it sounds like it's kind of the manifestation of priorities coming to life. You're not wrong there. So priorities inherently have winners and losers, kind of like a strategy. A real strategy has winners and losers. If and real priority has winners and losers. If you say everything's a priority, then actually, in fact, nothing's a priority, right? And that is very much why I pull the thread from values to priorities to resources. When you get clear on what you value, you then know what to prioritize. And when you know what to prioritize, you then know how to spend your resources. So, like those three things do very cleanly connect.
Sure.
And two things can be true. to your point, Nicole, you can value time at night with your kids and you can value your career, but those don't have to live in absolutes. They can coexist. They can both be present. So the good news, there's good news and bad news as it relates to this example or any example relative to boundaries. I'm not sure, like you hinted at the fact that it's an like it's an I thing, and you're absolutely right to double click on that. What's really behind it is you, as the individual, are responsible for the boundary. You cannot blame other people. You are the one that have to honor that. So the bad news is that when boundaries are abused, it's often our fault. It's not somebody else's. We are the ones enabling them. We are the ones giving them access or letting them cross a threshold or letting them open that fence that we did not invite them to. But the good news is, while we can't control others, we can control ourselves, we can influence others, and therefore we can influence the outcome. So it's a very empowering pivot to know you as an individual can absolutely effectuate the impact of what happens relative to that boundary. So, as an example, when you talk about, okay, it's 5 p.m. hits, you have kids crawling all over you, you got dinner you got to get on the table, all the things are happening at one time, and your boss is inherently pinging you still. There are, I think relative to most people and being like in mom mode, shutdown rituals really can help. There
Mhm.
is a reason that the commute allowed people to transition from like work mode to mom mode because it served as their shutdown ritual. And like that alone can help provide more so for you the breakup between being needed every minute at work and actually being able to be present where your feet are. But more than anything, if your boss is still pinging you at 5 p.m., a number of things could be happening. One, did you actually ever communicate your boundary yourself? Again, what do you own? What can you control? Because oftentimes we have the natural inclination to blame others on things that are truly ours to control. We can't control the weather, but what we can control is taking an umbrella. We can't control traffic, but what we can control is that we leave early for work. We can't control others' behaviors, but what we can control is how we influence them, how we tell them, like, hey, I'm clocking off. If you need me, you can catch me at this hour. Or communicating, thanks, noted, and I'll get to this when I can. Oftentimes we blame others because we don't do anything about it. So I think part of it is like, what can you control relative to the situation? And actually be honest with yourself about whether or not you're doing it. The other thing is oftentimes we blame boundaries where it really could be an even bigger problem. Like it could be a true capacity problem.
Mhm.
Does your boss know how overextended you are? Do you believe that you need to renegotiate the scope of what you own? Do you believe that you have really truly eliminated all the junk in your day that going back to me saying earlier, like I used to give myself away for free all the time. I was working 80-hour weeks, no doubt, consistently. But half of that work I had no real sponsorship over. I had nobody that was like asking me for the like, hey, when did you get this done? Like they were ideas and they were great ideas, but they weren't priority ideas. So I was taking on all this extra responsibility that made me feel like I had this really full, overflowing schedule when I honestly was doing a lot of that to myself because I was not saying, listen, is this an actual priority? If we have, okay, boss, you asked me to do task A and you asked me to do task B. Task A, that's a 50-hour task, like 50-hour consistently every week for the next 3 week task. Does task B really matter now? Or can we move this sequentially down the line? Or can we give part of this responsibility to someone else? Or, like fill in the blank. There are so many things that we take to be truths. We take to be black and white, and they're just frankly really not. Or we want to be the hero. We want to be the one that accomplishes the problem. We want to be the one that solves this. And it goes back to the addiction to Adderalls. Like there's generally something else behind it. It also could be that we're just not efficient with our job during the workday. Like we're not managing our energy well. We are not managing our calendars well. We are wasting time on a lot of things that really aren't helping us get there, which is why work is bleeding into the 5 p.m. And yeah, like I know salary roles often have peaks and valleys, but if that's happening consistently, it is telling me that is either you not really putting clear boundaries in place for yourself. Like you have to paint that fence for people.
Mhm.
I promise you they will never voluntarily paint it for you. If you are willing to give yourself away to them and make them continue looking good and make the organization continue looking good, they will 120% be willing to take all that you're willing to give. So you have to be the one responsible for painting that fence. And then you have to be the one that sticks to it to yourself. You can't expect others to stick to it if you're not sticking to it yourself. And if you believe that you're doing all of those things and something's still not working, I would examine capacity, I would examine scope, I would examine your energy levels. I think energy management is far, far more important than time management. And I say that as an industrial
Mhm.
engineer. I would challenge your standards. Like, are you trying to be a perfectionist everywhere when good enough is good enough in most places? Are you like really leveraging tools like time boxing? Parkinson's law is a thing.
Mhm.
Like if you give yourself 8 hours to get a task done, it will take 8 hours. If you give that same task only 1 hour, it will only take you 1 hour. Are you delegating? Like are you doing everything in your control and try to diagnose what the problem really is first.
Mhm.
And then you can actually recognize, is this a true boundary problem or is it something else? And once you know what the root cause is, that's what allows you to actually go move into problem solving mode and actually fix whatever that thing is.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. There's so much to it. And there's so many root cause scenarios that it might be. And I think you ran through, I think, pretty much all of them at least that I could have think of. And so I'm curious if someone's listening to this and they're like, oh my gosh, like yes, just yes to all of those things. Like they're realizing, oh, nope, I didn't communicate the boundary. Yep, I do, say yes more than I should. Yes, I am, becoming overwhelmed and, doom scrolling at work because, I don't want to start the task and I'm not managing my energy. I guess there's so many, it can feel big, right? It can feel like, especially for, women who really are feeling overwhelmed at work. And then we haven't even talked about that when we get home. And then there's the boundaries and priorities within, your marriage around carrying the heavy load, et cetera. So if someone is in sheer overwhelm, they feel like they've tried setting boundaries before and it hasn't worked. What would be, say, just one or two simple steps for them to take to begin shifting things and being able to create, set a meaningful boundary today, or to begin to shift some of that overwhelm utilizing a strategy around setting boundaries.
I mean, we've talked about values. When you get clear on what you value, that truly will set you free. I cannot impress that enough. It will help you decide what goes on your calendar, what doesn't, what gets your focus time and energy, what doesn't. Like that can free you so much. It
Hmm.
can also help alleviate some of the feeling for those of us that are high achieving and used to being the reliable ones. It can help free us from feeling like a jerk, quite frankly. Because
Hmm.
when you are accustomed to always saying yes to people, it can feel really lousy to have to say no. But it doesn't have to be a hard no. It can be a not right now. It can be a like, how can we
Hmm.
renegotiate how this gets done? There are a lot of massaging opportunities we have to the language we use that can sit with our hearts a little bit better than
Hmm.
just like a hard and fast no.
Hmm.
So I think that when you leverage tools like so the values we talked about, controls we've talked about, like right now, one of the boundaries I'm trying to put in place for myself is wine. Like I'm so used to having pouring a glass of wine about four
Hmm.
o'clock at the end of my workday. Like, I know I need to fix that. So I need to put a control in place to ensure that I'm not tempted to do that. So my walks need to be right around 4 o'clock, or my shower needs to be right around 4 o'clock.
Hmm.
So I think controls can be a very effective tool than just an
Hmm.
accountability partner.
Yeah.
Because when you have somebody else that you're saying, like, listen, this is really important to me, and this is this strategy I've designed to put in place. Can you help make sure that I meet this? Like, you're saying that out loud, you're putting it into the universe, and that inherently up levels your own accountability. But it also allows that person to check back in with you. And particularly when if the problem is related to work and you're having that conversation with somebody at work, they can help protect that for you
Hmm.
because you're giving them permission to. So I think control values and controls are probably the two easiest things.
Hmm.
But there's something to be said for surrounding yourself with really good company that's cheering for you and helping you protect what it is that you value most too.
Hmm.
And I'm sure that there are things that they're working on and would very much appreciate you playing that same role for them.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. And so just to kind of solidify or I guess condense what you shared, if you're listening and you're like, yes, I want to put in place a better boundary, it sounds like first maybe just asking yourself, does this align with what I value most? So going back to that scenario of are you going to spend 20 more minutes at work doing that task with your boss? Or are you going to shift to into staying home? Well, or shifting into mom gear? Well, it depends on your values, right? And so if you value that presence piece, then there's your answer. And then the second piece I heard is then maybe having like a back pocket phrase that you can say, you know, thanks for letting me know. I will get to that at blah, 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 blah. Or that's in the moment. Ideally, you've previously communicated to your boss that 5 p.m. or whatever your time is your transition out. And then the second piece that I heard you say is putting something in the way to make it easier to do the thing you want to do or not do the thing. So align that shower with that 4 p.m. reach for the glass of wine if that's the shift you're trying to make. That's super
Yeah,
helpful. I think that's really like a tangible, practical step if you were to choose one of those things to begin shifting things, and you'd be surprised at how much of a difference that something simple like that could make.
exactly. And I would just sometimes just channeling your dude energy can help. It sounds so ridiculous and so simple, but it's true. Like, men do not ask permission. Men do not apologize. They just do what's important to them. It's so black and white and so simple for them. And women tend to make it more complex. And I am the first to acknowledge I do the same thing. I am not preaching here as much as I am saying I see you because I am you.
Yeah, right.
So what helps, like, I do not feel right saying just no. I do feel like I have to be a little bit softer with it because it's where my heart is and it's what's most comfortable to me and it's what still honors the relationship with the person. So like I use this formula of first I thank the person. So as an example, I had my department head from the college I graduated from come and ask me to speak not too long ago. And I looked at her, I was like, you know what? Her name's Eileen. Like, Eileen, I'm so grateful that you came to me and thought of me for this opportunity. And I can't because of X, Y, and
Mhm.
Z. So it's like, thank you. Then I can't do it because of the reason. And then, but here's an alternative. Like, hey, but have you thought about this other person? I think they'd be really good about it. So
Mhm.
then I offer them a solution. And then I say, and maybe next year I'll have more capacity. Come back and talk to me then. So this formula of like thank them, explain why you can't, provide an alternative, and invite them to come back again. That feels right for me. So that
Mhm.
language helps me put boundaries in place in a way that aligns with the way that I like to show up for other people. But honest to goodness, men don't do that. They
Mhm.
just say no. No is a full sentence.
Mhm.
And I would also just encourage you to ask less permission and instead just state something. I promise you, if somebody has a problem with something, they're going to ask. Otherwise, just let them know, like, hey, this
Mhm.
isn't working. Like, I'm leaving for a doctor's appointment. Ping me if you need me. And then you
Yeah.
just move about your day. You don't ask.
And that last part right there, Courtney, is the piece. No matter what the language is, it's the then let it stand. and walk away and don't think about it again because we
Yep.
know that they're not, right? And that's the what would the dude do? That's like that energy. They're not spinning their heads over, oh no, did I offend that person? Did they think that I can't do my job? Just no, right? So I love that bring in the dude energy. That's a great little beat to end on. Well, Courtney, is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you want to leave our audience members with before we wrap up?
I feel really good about this conversation, Nicole.
We talked a lot. We
Uh,
covered a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we covered a lot. Like, I could truly talk about this all day long,
Right.
and I think we've hardly scratched the surface on
Yeah.
boundaries. And I think that kind of the devil's in the details with some of this, but I would just encourage everybody to be very mindful on what you value most. And what I mean
Mhm.
by that is not like what are your core values? Like my core value is integrity, but integrity is not what I mean here. I mean, what do you value in the way that you experience life? Like I do not value material items. I
Mhm.
drove a car, I just got a new car, so I can't really say this with a straight face anymore. But I drove my car at 176,000 miles. I didn't need a new shiny car, but you know what I do value? I value experiences. I value health. I value creating a life with my boys where they're going to want to come back home and still be adult friends with me. So the
Mhm.
decisions that I make are in support of creating like to aging gracefully and creating that kind of relationship with my kids and helping them experience the world. So knowing those things, I can pull on that thread and then it defines like how I do work, how I do life, how I do my relationships, what I invest in, what I don't. So don't underestimate the power of really understanding for yourself what it is you value because I promise it will allow you to stand so confidently and so firmly in everything you do every single day.
Oh, what a great note to end on. And Courtney, what does it mean to you to burn beautifully?
Oh, this is this is I love that you asked that question, Nicole, and it's not easy.
It's not.
Um,
You kind of
I
already answered it, but go ahead.
yeah, like in my line of work, it's easy to hear burn and then immediately go to burnout. Like being so consumed and being so depleted, and especially having been there, we both have. We've talked about it already in this call. But I think that burning beautifully is probably the exact opposite. Like
That's right.
you burn out because you're burning for everyone else's vision of your life. But burning beautifully is probably like standing in your own energy for you. Once again, it goes back to being really clear that you're living life for what actually matters to you and what you most value. And it's that kind of fire that like builds the real kindling, pulling on that same analogy that we need to
Mhm.
sustain things. So probably somewhere in that
Love it.
swirl.
What a great answer. A plus. That was beautiful. Thanks so
Yeah.
much, Courtney, for that answer. And before we wrap up, I know that our listeners are going to want to know how to stay in touch with you. And I also know you have an incredible free gift. Could you share what that is?
Yeah, thanks for again for the invitation, Nicole, and for asking the question. So
Yeah.
I love when people connect with me on Instagram. You can find me at Working Moms Movement. I'm fairly active there, especially my DMs. I love developing true, meaningful relationships with people. So please go add me, DM me at Working Moms Movement. I also have a podcast called The Life Management System. It is all about how you live more effectively in a way that really protects what it is that you value and helps get you out of overwhelm and out of like the survival mode of being in your to-do list all day. So a lot of efficiency and effectiveness hacks, but also like a lot of real mindset stuff. So would love if you tune in there. And then last but not least, on the topic of boundaries, I do have a 3-minute quiz that can help you identify where you are probably most leaking your energy because
Mhm.
often we tend to make assumptions on what is hanging us up the most, but sometimes having like an unbiased tool to gut check will allow us just like kind of the like honest girlfriend talk we need
Mhm.
to really know what where we need to focus. So do I share where that is, Nicole, or do you share that where that is?
So we will have it linked on
Okay.
our virtual event room page. So it'll
Okay.
be there for them to click on, and you can share where else they can find it if you'd like.
Okay, yeah, or so get it there, as Nicole said, or you can go to workingmomsmovement.com/boundaries. And again, it is a 3-minute self-check quiz to know exactly where you are leaking your energy.
Oh, that sounds fabulous. Well, Courtney, thank you again for being such an awesome guest. I am definitely leaving this conversation thinking a lot about boundaries and values and how those two work together.